February 15th. Dear Mr. Henshaw, I haven't written to you for a long time because I know you're busy, but I need help with the story I am trying to write for the Young Writers Yearbook. I got started, but I don't know how to finish it. My story is about a man 10 feet tall who drives a big truck, the kind my dad drives. The man is made of wax, and every time he crosses the desert, he melts a little. He makes so many trips and melts so much he finally can't handle the gears or reach the brakes. That is as far as I can get. What should I do now? The boys in my class who are writing about monsters just bring in a new monster on the last page to finish off the villains with a laser. That kind of ending doesn't seem right to me. I don't know why. Please help. Just a postcard will do. Hopefully. Libet. P.S. Until I started trying to write a story, I wrote in my diary almost every day. February 28th. Dear Mr. Henshaw, thank you for answering my letter. I was surprised that you had trouble writing stories. When you were my age, I think you are right. Maybe I am not ready to write a story. I understand what you mean. A character in a story should solve a problem or change in some way. I can see that a waxman who melts until he's a puddle wouldn't be there to solve anything, and melting isn't the sort of change you mean. I suppose somebody could turn up on the last page and make candles out of him. That would change him all right, but that's not the ending I want. I asked Miss Martinez if I had to write a story for young writers, and she said I could write a poem or a description. Your grateful friend Lee. P.S. I bought a copy of Ways to Amuse a Dog at a garage sale. I hope you don't mind. From the Diary of Lee Botts, Volume 2. Thursday, March 1st. I'm getting behind in this diary for several reasons, including working on my story and writing to Mr. Henshaw. Really, not just pretend. I also had to buy a new notebook because I had filled up the first one. The same day, I bought a beat-up black lunchbox in the thrift shop down the street and started carrying my lunch in it. The kids were surprised, but nobody made fun of me because a black lunchbox isn't the same as one of those square boxes covered with cartoon characters the first and second graders carry. A couple of boys asked me if it was my dad's. I just grinned and said, "Where do you think I got it?" The next day, my little slices of salami rolled around cream cheese were gone. But I expected that. But I'll get that thief yet. I'll make him really sorry he ate all the best things out of my lunch. Next, I went to the library for books on batteries. I took out a couple of easy books on electricity. Really easy, because I have never given much thought to batteries. But all I know is that when you want to use a flashlight, the battery is usually dead. I finally gave up on my story about the 10-foot waxman, which was really pretty dumb. I thought I would write a poem about butterflies for young writers because a poem can be short, but it is hard to think about butterflies and burglar alarms at the same time. So I studied the electricity books instead. The books didn't have directions for an alarm in a lunchbox, but I learned enough about batteries and switches and insulated wires, so I think I can figure it out myself. Friday, March 2nd. Back to the poem tonight. The only rhyme I can think of for butterfly is flutter by. I can think of rhymes like trees and breeze, which are pretty boring, and then I think of wheeze and sneeze. Poem about butterflies wheezing and sneezing seems silly. And anyway, a couple of girls are already writing poems about monarch butterflies that flutter by. Sometimes I start a letter to Dad, thanking him for the $20, but I can't finish that either. I don't know why. Saturday, March 3rd. Today I took my lunchbox and Dad's $20 to the hardware store and looked around. I found an ordinary light switch. a little battery, and a cheap doorbell. While I was looking around for the right kind of insulated wire, a man who had been watching me — boys my age always get watched when they go into stores — asked if he could help me. He was a nice old gentleman who said, "What are you planning to make, son?" Son, he called me son, and my dad calls me Kid. I don't want to tell the man, but when he looked at the things I was holding, he grinned and said, "Having trouble with your lunch, aren't you?" I nodded and said, "I'm trying to make a burglar alarm." He said, That's what I guessed. I've had a workman in here with the same problem." It turned out that I needed a 6-volt lantern battery instead of the battery I had picked out. He gave me a couple of tips, and after I paid for the things, a little slap on the back and said, "Good luck, son." I tore home with all the things I bought. First, I made a sign for my door that said, "Keep out, Mom. That means you." Then I went to work of fastening one wire from the battery to the switch and from the other side of the switch to the doorbell. Then I fastened the second wire from the battery to the doorbell. It took me a while to get it right. Then I taped the battery in one corner of the lunchbox and the doorbell in another. I screwed the switch up at the back of the box and taped that in place too. Here I ran into a problem. I thought I could take the wire clamp meant to hold a thermos bottle inside the lunchbox lid and took it under the switch if I reached in carefully as I closed the box. That clamp wasn't quite long enough. After some thinking and experimenting, I twisted a wire loop onto it. Then I closed the box just enough so I could get my hand inside and push the wire loop over the button on the switch before I took my hand out and closed the box. Then I opened the box. My burglar alarm worked. That bell inside the box went off with a terrible racket that brought Mom to my door. "Lee, what on earth is going on in here?" She shouted about the alarm. I let her in and gave her a demonstration of my burglar alarm. She laughed and said it was a great invention. One thing was bothering me. Would my sandwich muffle the bell? Mom must have been wondering the same thing, because she suggested taping a piece of cardboard into the lid that would make a shelf for my sandwich. I did, and that worked too. I can't wait until Monday, March 5th. Today, Mom picked my lunch carefully, and we tried the alarm to see if it still worked. It did. Good, good and loud. When I got to school, Mr. Friedley said, "Nice to see you smilingly. You should try it more often." I parked my lunchbox behind the partition and waited. I waited all morning for the alarm to go off. Miss Martinez asked if I had a mind on my work. I pretended I did, but all the time I was really waiting for my alarm to go off so I could dash back behind the partition and tackle the thief. When nothing happened, I began to worry. Maybe the loop had somehow slipped off the switch on the way to school. Lunchtime came. The alarm still hadn't gone off. We all picked up our lunches and went off to the cafeteria. When I set my box on the table in front of me, I realized that I had a problem, big problem. If the loop hadn't slipped off the switch, my alarm was still triggered. I just sat there staring at my lunchbox, not knowing what to do. "How come you're not eating?" Barry asked with his mouth full. Barry's sandwiches are never cut in half, and he always takes a big bite out of one side to start. Everybody at the table was looking at me. I thought about saying I wasn't hungry, but I was. I thought about taking my lunchbox out into the hall to open, but if the alarm was still triggered, there was no way I could open it quietly. Finally, I thought, here goes. I unsnapped the two fasteners on the box and held my breath as I opened the lid. Wow, my alarm went off. The noise was so loud it startled everybody at the table, including me, and made everyone in the cafeteria look around. I looked up and saw Mr. Friedley grinning at me over by the garage can. Then I turned off the alarm. Suddenly, everybody seemed to be noticing me. The principal, always prowls around keeping an eye on things at lunchtime, came over to examine my lunchbox. He said, "That's quite an invention you have there." "Thanks," I said, pleased that the principal seemed to like my alarm. Some of the teachers came out of their lunchroom to see what the noise was all about. I had to give a demonstration. It seems I wasn't the only one who had things stolen from my lunch, and all the kids said they wanted lunch boxes with alarms too, even those whose lunches were never good enough to have anything stolen. Barry said he'd like an alarm like that on the door of his room at home. I began to feel like some sort of hero. Maybe I'm not so medium after all. One thing bothers me, though. I still don't know who's been robbing my lunch. Tuesday, March 6th. Today, Barry asked me to come home with him to see if I could help him rig up a burglar alarm for his room because he has a bunch of little sisters and stepsisters who get into his stuff. I thought I could because I had seen an alarm like that in one of the electricity books from the library. Barry lives in a big old house that is sort of cheerful and messy, with little girls all over the place. As it turned out, Barry didn't have the right kind of battery, so we just fooled around looking at his models. Barry never uses the directions when he puts models together, because the directions are too hard and spoil the fun. He throws them away and figures out how the pieces fit by himself. I still don't know what to write for young writers, but I was feeling so good. I finally wrote to Dad to thank him for the $20 because I had found a good use for it, even if I couldn't save it all toward the typewriter. I didn't say much. I wonder if Dad will marry the pizza boy and his mother. I worry about that a lot. Thursday, March 15th. This week, several kids turned up with my lunchboxes with burglar alarms. You know that song about the hills ringing with the sound of music? Well, you might say our cafeteria rang with the sound of burglar alarms. The fed didn't last very long, and after a while, I didn't even bother to set my alarm. Nobody has robbed my lunchbox since I set it off that day. I never did find out who the thief was, and now that I stopped to think about it, I'm glad. If he had set off the alarm when my lunchbox was in the classroom, he would have been in trouble, big trouble. Maybe he was just somebody whose mother had packed bad lunches, jelly, sandwiches on that white bread that tastes like Kleenex. Or maybe he had to pack his own lunches and there was never anything good in the house to put in them. I've seen people look into their lunches, take out the cookies, and throw the rest in the garbage. Mr. Friedley always looks worried when they do this. I'm not saying robbing lunchboxes is right. I'm saying I'm glad I don't know who the thief was because I have to go to school with him. Friday, March 16th. Tonight I was staring at the piece of paper trying to think of something to write for young writers when the phone rang. Mom told me to answer because she was washing her hair. Was that? My stomach felt as if it was dropping to the floor, the way it always does when I hear his voice. "How are you doing, kid?" he asked. "Fine," I said, thinking of the success of my burglar alarm. "Great. I got your letter," he said. "That's good," I said. His call took me so by surprise that I could feel my heart pounding, and I couldn't think of anything to say until I asked, "Have you found another dog to take Bandit's place?" I think what I really meant was, "Have you found another boy to take my place?" "No, but I asked about him on my CV." Dad told me He may turn up yet. I hope so. This conversation was going no place. Really didn't know what to say to my father. It was embarrassing. Then Dad surprised me. He asked, "Do you ever miss your old dad?" I had to think a minute. I missed him all right, but I couldn't seem to get the words out. My silence must have bothered him because he asked, "Are you still there?" "Sure, Dad, I miss you," I told him. It was true, but not as true as it had been a couple of months ago. I still wanted him to pull up in front of the house in his big rig, but now I knew I couldn't count on it. "Sorry I don't get over your way more often," he said. "I hear the sugar refinery in Spreckles is closing down." "I read about it in the paper," I said. "Is your mother handy?" he asked. "I will see," I said, even though by then she was standing by the phone with her hair wrapped in a towel. She shook her head. She didn't want to talk to Dad. "She's washing her hair," I said. "Tell her I'll manage to send your support check sometime next week," he said. "So long, kid. Keep your nose clean." "So long, Dad," I answered. "Drive carefully. I guess he'll never learn that my name is Lee and that my nose is clean. Maybe he thinks I'll never learn that he drives carefully. He doesn't really. He's a good driver, but he speeds to make time whenever he can avoid the highway patrol. All truckers do." After that, I couldn't get back to thinking about young writers, so I picked up Ways to Amuse Your Dog and read it for the thousandth time. I read harder books now, but I still feel good when I read that book. I wonder where Mr. Henshaw is. Saturday, March 17th. Today is Saturday, so this morning I walked to the butterfly trees again. The grove was quiet and peaceful, and because the sun was shining, I stood there a long time, looking at the orange butterflies floating through the gray and green leaves, and listening to the sound of the ocean on the rocks. There aren't as many butterflies now. Maybe they are starting to go north for the summer. I thought I might write about them in prose instead of poetry, but on the way home I got to thinking about that and one time when he took me along when he was hauling grapes to a winery, and what a great day it had been. Tuesday, March 20th. Yesterday, Miss Neely, the librarian, asked if I had written anything for the Young Writers Yearbook because all writing had to be returned in by tomorrow. When I told her I hadn't, she said I still had 24 hours, and why didn't I get busy? So I did, because I really would like to meet a famous author. My story about the 10-foot wax man went into the wastebasket. Next, I tried to start a story called The Great Lunchbox Mystery, but I couldn't seem to turn my lunchbox experience into a story because I don't know who the thieves were, and I don't want to know. Finally, I dashed off a description of the time I rode with my father when he was tracking the load of grapes down Highway 152. Highway 152 through Peccio passed to a winery. I put in things like the signs that said steep grade trucks use low gear and that downshifted and and how skillful he was hauling a long heavy load on the curves. I put in about the hooks on the telephone wires and about that high peak where Blackbart's lookout used to watch for travelers coming through the pass so he could signal to Blackbart to rob them, and how the leaves on the trees along the stream at the bottom of the pass were turning yellow, and how good tons of grapes smelled in the sun. I left out the part about the waitresses and the video games. Then I copied the whole thing over in case neatness counts and gave it to Miss Neely. Saturday, March 24th. Mom said I had to invite Barry over to our house for supper because I had been going to his house after school so often. We had been working on a burglar alarm for his room, which we finally got to work with some help from a library book. I wasn't sure Barry would like to come to our house, which is so small compared to his, but he accepted when I invited him. Mom cooked a casserole full of good things like ground beef, chilies, tortillas, tomatoes, and cheese. Barry said he really liked eating at our house because he got tired of eating with a bunch of little sisters, waving spoons and drumsticks. That made me happy. It helps to have a friend. Barry says his burglar alarm still works. The trouble is his little sister to his little sisters think it's fun to open his door to set it off. Then they giggle and hide. This was driving his mother crazy, so he finally had to disconnect it. We all laughed about this. Barry and I felt good about making something that worked even if he can't use it. Barry saw the sign on my door that said, "Keep out, Mom, that means you." He asked if my mom really stays out of my room. I said, sure, if I keep things picked up. Mom is not a snoop. Barry said he wished he could have a room nobody ever went into. I was glad Barry didn't ask to use the bathroom. Maybe I'll start scrubbing off the mildew after all. Sunday, March 25th. I kept thinking about that and how lonely he sounded and wondering what happened to the pizza boy. I don't like to think about that being lonesome, but I don't like to think about the pizza boy cheering him up either. Tonight at supper, beans and friends. I got on my courage to ask Mom if she thought Dad would get married again. She thought a while and then said, I don't see how he could afford to. He has big payments to make on the truck, and the price of diesel oil goes up all the time. And when people can afford to build houses or buy cars, he won't be hauling lumber or cars. I thought this over. I know that a license for a truck like his costs over $1,000 a year. But he always sends my support payments, I said, even if he's late sometimes. Yes, he does that, agreed my mother. Your father isn't a bad man by any means. Suddenly I was mad and disgusted with the whole thing. Then why don't you two get married again? I guess I wasn't very nice about the way I said it. Mom looked me straight in the eye. Because your father will never grow up, she said. I knew that was all she would ever say about it. Tomorrow they give out the Young Writer's Yearbook. Maybe I'll be lucky and get to go have lunch with the famous author. Monday, March 26th. Today wasn't the greatest day of my life. When our class went to the library, I saw a stack of yearbooks and could hardly wait for Miss Neely to hand them out. When I finally got mine and opened it to the first page, there was a monster story, and I saw I hadn't won first prize. I kept turning. I didn't win second prize, which went to a poem, and I didn't win third or fourth prize either. And I turned another page and saw honorable mention and under it, A Day on Dad's Rig by Lee M. Botch. There was my title with my name under it in print, even if it was mimeographed to print. Mimeographed to print. I can't say I wasn't disappointed because I hadn't won a prize. I was. I was really disappointed about not getting to meet the mysterious famous author, but I like to see my name in print. Some kids were mad because they didn't win or even got something printed. They said they wouldn't ever try to write again, which I think is pretty dumb. I had heard that rare authors sometimes have their books turned down. I figure you win some, you lose some. Then Miss Neely announced that the famous author the winners would get to have lunch with was Angela Badger. The girls were more excited than the boys because Angela Badger writes mostly about girls with problems like big feet or pimples or something. I'd still like to meet her because she's, as they say, a real life author, and I've never met a real life author. I'm glad Mr. Henshaw isn't the author because then I would really be disappointed that I didn't get to meet him. Friday, March 30th. Today turned out to be exciting. In the middle of a second period, Miss Neely called me out of class and asked if I would like to go have lunch with Angela Badger. I said, sure, how come? Miss Neely explained that the teachers discovered that the winning poem had been copied out of a book and wasn't original, so the girl who submitted it would not be allowed to go and would uh, would I like to go in her place? Would I? Miss Neely telephoned Mom at work for permission, and I gave my lunch to Barry because my lunches are better than his. The other winners were all dressed up, but I didn't care. I've noticed that others like Mr. Henshaw usually wear old plaid shirts in the pictures on the back of their books. My shirt is just as old as his, so I knew it was okay. Miss Neely drove us in her own car to the Holiday Inn, where some other librarians and their winners were waiting in the lobby. Then Angela Badger arrived with Mr. Badger, and we were all led into the dining room, which was pretty crowded. One of the librarians, who was a sort of super librarian, told the winners to sit at a long table with a sign that said reserved. Angela Badger sat in the middle, and some of the girls pushed it to sit beside her. I sat across from her. Super Librarian explained that we could choose our lunch from the salad bar. Then all the librarians went off and sat at a table with Mr. Badger. There I was face to face with a real live author who seemed like a nice lady, plump with wild hair, and I couldn't think of a thing to say because I hadn't read her books. Some girls told her how much they loved her books, but some of the boys and girls were too shy to say anything. Nothing seemed to happen until Mrs. Badger said, "Why don't we all go help ourselves to lunch at the salad bar?" What a mess! Some people didn't understand about salad bars, but Mrs. Badger led the way, and we helped ourselves to lettuce and bean salad and potato salad and all the usual stuff they lay out on salad bars. A few of the younger kids were too short to reach anything but the bowls on the first rows. They weren't doing too well until Mrs. Badger helped them out. Getting lunch took a long time, longer than in a school cafeteria, and when we carried our plates back to our table, people at other tables ducked and dodged as if they expected us to dump our lunches on their heads. All one boy had on his plate was a piece of lettuce and a slice of tomato because he thought he was going to get to go back for roast beef and fried chicken. We had to straighten him out. That explained that all we got was salad. He turned red and went back for more salad. I was still trying to think of something interesting to say to Mrs. Badger while I chased the garbanzo beans around my plate with a fork. A couple of girls did all the talking, telling Mrs. Badger how they wanted to write books exactly like hers. The other librarians were busy talking and laughing with Mr. Badger, who seemed to be a lot of fun. Mrs. Badger tried to get some of the shy people to say something without much luck, and I still couldn't think of anything to say to a lady who wrote books about girls with big feet or pimples. Finally, Mrs. Badger looked straight at me and asked, "What did you write for the yearbook?" I felt myself turn red and answered, "Just something about a ride on a truck." "Oh," said Mrs. Badger, "so you are the author of A Day on Dad's Rig." Everyone was quiet. None of us had known the real live author would have read what we had written, but she had, and she remembered my title. "I just got honorable mention," I said, but I was thinking she called me an author. A real live author called me an author. What difference does that make? Asked Mrs. Badger. Judges never agree. I happen to like A Day on Dad's Rig because it was written by a boy who wrote honestly about something he knew and had strong feelings about. You made me feel what it was like to ride down a steep grade with tons of grapes behind me. But I couldn't make it into a story, I said, feeling a whole lot braver. Who cares? Said Mrs. Badger with a wave of her hand. She's the kind of person who wears rings on her forefingers. What do you expect? The ability to write stories comes later when you lived longer and have more understanding. A Day on Dad's Rig was a splendid work for a boy your age. You wrote like you, and you did not try to imitate someone else. This is one mark of a good writer. Keep it up. I noticed a couple of girls who had been saying that wanted to write books exactly like Angela Badger exchanged embarrassed looks. Gee, thanks, was all I could say. The the way Waiters began to plunk down dishes of ice cream. Everyone got over being shy and began to ask Mrs. Badger if she wrote in pencil or on the typewriter, and did she ever have books rejected, and were her characters real people, and did she ever have pimples when she was a girl like the girl in her book, and what did it feel like to be a famous author. I don't think answers to those questions were very important, but I did have one question I wanted to ask, which I finally managed to get in at the last minute when Mrs. Badger was autographing some books people had brought. Mrs. Badger, I said, did you ever meet Boyd Henshaw? Why, yes, she said, scribbling away in someone's book. I once met him at a meeting of librarians where we were on the same program. What's he like? I asked over the head of a girl crowding up with her book. He's a very nice young man with a wicked twinkle in his eye, she answered. I think I have known that since the time he answered my questions when Miss Martinez made us write to another. On the ride home, everybody was chattering about Mrs. Badger this and Mrs. Badger that. I didn't want to talk. I just wanted to think. Real life author had called me an author. Real life author had told me to keep it up. Mom was proud of me when I told her. The gas station stopped pinging a long time ago, but I wanted to write all this down while I remembered. I'm glad tomorrow is Saturday. If I had to go to school, I would yawn. I wish Dad was here so I could tell him all about today. March 31st. Dear Mr. Henshaw, I'll keep this short to save you time reading it. I had to tell you something. You're right, I wasn't ready to write an imaginary story. But guess what? I wrote a true story which won honorable mention in the yearbook. Maybe next year I'll write something that will win first or second prize. Maybe by then I will be able to write an imaginary story. I just thought you would like to know. Thank you for your help. If it hadn't been for you, I might have handed in that dumb story about the melting wax trucker. Your friend, the author, Libot. P.S. I still write in the diary you started me on. From the diary of Libot, Saturday, March 31st. This morning the sun was shining, so Barry and I mailed my letter to Mr. Henshaw and then walked over to see if there were still any butterflies in the grove. We only saw 3 or 4, so I guess most of them have gone north for the summer. Then we walked down to the little park at Lover's Point and sat on a rock watching sailboats on the bay for a while. When clouds began to blow in, we walked back to my house. A tractor without a trailer attached was parked in front. I began to run, and Dad and Bandit got out of the cab. So long, I gotta go, yelled Barry, who has heard a lot about Dad and Bandit and who understands about parents and divorce. Dad and I just stood there looking at one another until I said, "Hi, Dad. Seen any shoes on the highway lately?" "Lots of them." Dad grinned half a grin, not like his old self. "Boots, sneakers, all kinds." Bendy came over to me, wagging his tail and looking happy. He was wearing a new red bandana around his neck. "How are you doing, kid?" asked Dad. "I brought your dog back." "Gee, thanks," I said, hugging Bandit. Dad's stomach hung over his belt, and he wasn't as tall as I remembered him. "You've grown," he said, which is what grown-ups always say when they don't know what else to say to kids. Did Dad expect me to stop growing just because he hadn't been around? "How did you find Bandit?" I asked. "By asking every day over my CV," he said. "I finally got an answer from a trucker who said he had picked up a lost dog in a snowstorm in the Sierra, a dog that was still riding with him. Last week we turned up in the same line at a weigh scale. I'm sure glad you got him back," I said, and after trying to think of something else to say, I asked, "How come you're not hauling anything?" I think I hoped he would say he had driven all the way from Bakersfield just to bring Bandit back to me. "I'm waiting for a reefer to be loaded with broccoli and Salinas," he told me. "Since it wasn't far, I thought I'd take a run over here before I take off for Ohio." So that he had come to see me just because of broccoli, after all this month when I had longed to see him. It took a lot of broccoli to get him here. I felt let down and my feelings hurt. They hurt so much I couldn't think of anything to say. Just then Mom drove up and got out of her old car, which looked little and shabby beside Dad's big rig. "Hello, Bill," she said. "Hello, Bonnie," he said. We all just stood there with Bandit waving his tail until Dad said, "Aren't you going to ask me in?" "Sure, come on in," said Mom. Bandit followed us down the walk past the duplex to our little house and came inside with us. "How about a cup of coffee?" Mom asked Dad. "Sure," agreed Dad, looking around. "So this is where you two live." Then he sat down on the couch. "Bonnie, is there any chance?" Dad began. "No," said Mom in a sad, soft voice. Oh no. Um Then he sat down on the couch. "This is where we live as long as we can pay the rent," said Mom in a flat voice, "and it can never be towed away." Mom really hated that mobile home we used to live in. Dad looked tired and sad in a way I had never seen him look before. While Mom fussed around making coffee, I showed him the burglar alarm I had made for my lunchbox. He worked it a couple of times and said, "I always knew I had a smart kid." Mom was taking such a long time making coffee, I felt I had to entertain Dad, so I showed him my yearbook and what I had written. He read it and said, "Funny, but I still think about that day every time I haul grapes to a winery." "I'm glad you remember it too." That made me feel good. He looked at me a while as if he expected to see I don't know what. Then he rumpled my hair and said, "You're smarter than your old man." That embarrassed me. I didn't know how to answer. Finally, Mom brought in 2 mugs of coffee. She gave one to Dad and carried hers over to a chair. They just sat there looking at one another over the rims of their mugs. I wanted to yell, "Do something, say something, don't just sit there." Finally, Dad said, "I miss you, Bonnie." I had a feeling I didn't want to hear this conversation, but I didn't know how to get out of there, so I got down on the floor and hugged Bandit, who rolled over on his back to have his stomach scratched just as if he had never been away. "I'm sorry," said Mom. I think she meant she was sorry that I missed her. Or maybe she was sorry about everything. I don't know. "Have you found someone else?" asked Dad. "No," said Mom. "I think about you a lot on the long hauls," said Dad, "especially at night." I haven't forgotten you, said Mom. Bonnie, is there any chance? Dad began. No, said Mom in a sad, soft voice. There isn't a chance. Why not? Asked Dad. Too many lonely days and nights not knowing where you were. Too much waiting for phone calls you forgot to make because you were whooping it up at some truck stop, said Mom. Too many boring Saturday nights in some noisy tavern. Too many broken promises. Things like that. Well, said Dad and set his mug down. That's what I came to find out. So I